If you're new to us here, we like to recap every episode of Critical Role before we dive into our proper discussion of it. And we cut that out of this podcast and host it separately on YouTube for anyone that likes to get caught up each week before the episode, or maybe if you've fallen behind and want a quick way to catch up, you can check these out. So if you find yourself on just that recap video right now, and you're interested in listening to our full podcast discussing the episode, that'll be linked in the description below. So come check us out. But yeah, without further ado, let's jump into it. This is Critical Role Campaign 3, Episode 36, and I actually have the title in front of me.
So
A Desperate Call. Oh, we're both on top of it today.
We had it ready this time.
I think it's because we have coffee and
bro, we're vibing
firing off on all cylinders
for sure.
But yeah, do you want to take us off on this one?
I'll take the first step, and like the disclaimer, like whenever we're doing the recap, it's like 4 hours of content. So we're always kind of like picking like how do we make the recap as like important as possible without getting lost in the details. So disclaimer, there may be details I don't mention only because I did not know it was a key like breadcrumb from campaign 1. So if you're like, actually you didn't mention this one part, I'll be like, I had no idea.
And I'll probably cover that in the discussion. So yeah,
there you go. Thanks.
Check that out.
Anyway, so the episode opens up from where this awesome cliffhanger that we ended on, which is them stepping through this portal into what appeared to be Whitestone. And it is, in fact, Whitestone. They step out. It's this beautiful, sprawling city. It seems to actually be growing and expanding. There's absolutely these implications of it being like this very healthy time for the city. And the party is a bit in awe almost of like, wow, this is really cool. As the portal's opening, they're actually stepping out. They don't realize it, but pulling my Legends of Vox Machina knowledge, they're stepping out right in front of the roots of the massive gargantuan sun tree. And Chetney even asks Keyleth, like, hey, is it cool if I take some of this wood, from the sun tree? And she's like, maybe you should hold off on that for now, because it's kind of a big deal. But so, yeah, the party's like, okay, this is where we are. This sounds really cool. And Keyleth's like, all right, we're going to head to basically Castle Whitestone, and I have a friend who's going to be able to help you out. So they're heading that way. There's some really cool details of Keyleth as she walks. The way Matt describes it is like the literal footsteps behind her is growing grass, and like life is sprouting out from her path. Which what a freaking BA D&D moment for one of your characters, I guess. And really, as they're making their way, they're also kind of exchanging small details on like, has anyone ever been here? Is this people's first time? Orem, surprisingly enough, it is his first time to Whitestone. I think Chetney says he was here a long time ago, like years ago, which I thought was an interesting detail. Ashton mentions he's never left Marquette befit. And there's also even a bit of a time zone change that, Matt kind of jokingly is like, okay, yeah, right. Like the time zones are different here. It's a bit I can't remember if it was earlier or later in the day than what they expected.
I think it was early, like early morning.
Yes, right. So one of the things, though, that comes up as they're talking and walking is Keyleth turns to Orem and is kind of like, hey, I'm down to help you, but you remember last time we did this, the last time we tried to save Will, your husband, and Derek, your father, so to speak. Remember what happened? And he's like, yes, I remember, but I this was so abrupt. It was in the moment. I wonder if maybe the toxins aren't in play with our friend. So they actually lay her down. Keyleth looks her over. It's a really tense moment. I mean, the party's just like crushed with Laudna being gone. And Keyleth looks her over and fortunately says the toxins aren't here. So that's one good thing. And they also say, Keyleth also mentions like, hey, we do have a few options here. Just want to make sure you guys have 25,000 gold in case we need it. And they're like, we're very close. We almost have it. As they make their way to the castle, she brings them in, introduces them to Lord Derolo Percival. I'm not going to say his full name. because I wouldn't do it right. And he actually identifies himself as, oh man, let me find it. Do you have it on hand for you?
Are you talking about his title?
Yeah, his title.
It's
I
like
got it.
okay.
The architect of enlightened progress of the Chamber of Whitestone, which I thought was just an interesting, cool deal that he didn't identify himself as the King of Whitestone. And before Keyleth sort of hands them off, she says, like, hey, I have some other business to take care of. They're like, hey, by the way, we just want to make sure you know all the things that are happening. So they talk about the Nightmare King, Otahan Thul, like all basically the things that are like so important for sort of the sake of Exandria. And Keyleth is there's something going on there. She is obviously overwhelmed with the number of things. The apogee solstice. She mentions some archmages she's trying to keep in check. She actually, interestingly enough, mentions they're doing things to hold off efforts of the betrayer gods, which could be just like a consistently always happening thing or like something intentional. And even a ceremony in Vasselheim that she's thinking about. But she's like, okay, that's just another thing. Like, we got it. And Chetty actually says, like, hey, you got this, which is kind of a cool, encouraging moment. It's like when an 8-year-old you're an adult and they're like, you got it. And you're like, thanks. But anyway, hands them off. Percy introduces himself, welcomes them into the inner chamber of Castle Whitestone. He actually points out his daughter, Gwendolyn, the deep red-skinned daughter who's hiding behind a door, peeking through to see who the guests are, who comes out in this cute blue sundress and just very cute kid and starts to read a book in a corner. Later, 2 arguing teenagers come in, presumably other ones of their kids, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I believe so.
Followed by Vexalia, who identifies herself as, I think, Lady of the Grey Hunt.
Yeah, Grand Mistress of the Grey Hunt.
Thank you. That's much cooler than Lady of the Grey Hunt. So the Grand Mistress of the Grey Hunt. And it's kind of like, oh, hello, everyone. And, you know, they all kind of have like these pleasantries. And then Vexalia is like, hey, I need to go get ready for the day. She leaves because it's early morning. Well, Percy calls for Pike, says that if they can't find her, she's probably at the bakery. And they begin to talk about what's happening here. They basically say, like, hey, we'd love our friend to get revived. And Percy's like, surely you understand, like, we can't revive everyone. And that's when they're like, no, this isn't just anyone. And the party is absolutely kind of pleading with them because, again, this is Laudna. Right. And they explain that she is the lookalike for Vexalia from the Sun Tree. And they mentioned Delilah Briarwood, which seems to trigger something within Percy. Getting to the point, Pike eventually shows up in this, you know, boisterous, jovial way. It's kind of like, hey, guys, what's going on? And Percy's like, hey, this person needs some help. Now, there is this moment where FCG is like, yeah, well, you know, because Delilah, you know, has kind of cursed her. And I even felt like there was like kind of a look from the party of like, dude, like, don't mention the fact that Delilah's around. Pike looks Laudna over and Percy informs her like she's, you know, it's almost like as he's about to say from the Sun Tree, we realize Vexalia is actually looking from above, like from like a balcony or from the top of the stairs. And she's like, oh. And she realizes sort of the similar appearances. And she's like, yeah, we have to help them. We did this. We have to help Laudna. So they start the ceremony. She starts the resurrection spell and something is keeping her. She's realizing that there's actually 2 souls that are entwined within this body. And she says, one's Laudna. And then she looks at Percy and says, and the other one is Delilah Briarwood. And then we go to break. Ooh. So you take it from there, my friend.
Yeah. So we pick up on that cliffhanger with everyone absorbing, you know, what Pike just said, that Laudna and Delilah's souls are bound together. And Percy is immediately like, no, like sets his foot down, saying the issue is now settled. She is to remain gone. And basically, Bell's Hells just start arguing with him. And they're just trying to come up with any possible solution that maybe, would satisfy him while also bringing Laudna back. Um, Pike, meanwhile, she's like, yeah, if I were to complete this ritual, I don't know whose soul would be the one to come back. But Pike says, but hey, let me go do some research. I feel like I maybe remember some of these rites from my, my religious books from the Everlight that I could look into, and maybe there's a solution. And Percy says, you report to me if you find anything, but do nothing without my approval. So the group, Pike and Vex as well, with the rest of Bell's Hells, decide to go back towards Pike's house so she can look at her research books. And Percy, steps away. But not before Ashton chases after Percy to confront him.
I love this. Man.
Yeah, this was great.
So good.
So Ashton basically says, we're not satisfied how that went back there, and basically kind of, gives him a piece of his mind.
Yeah.
And Percy's like, you're young, like you'll learn to live with unsatisfactory things. And Ashton's like, oh, trust me, I've, lived with a lot. And they kind of go back and forth. And ultimately, Percy, I think, kind of empathizes with Ashton a bit and tells him, refocus this anger and use it to build, to create, to protect. Like this can serve you. But he, again, lets him know that, like, I will not allow my children to grow up in a world with Delilah Briarwood. If she were to come back, then I will end her and you for, like, if that's what it takes to protect my city. So Ashton then leaves, and as he's making his way back to the group, he does take a quick little detour where he finds this little group of bears kind of tucked away behind a staircase, and he notices that there's one like very ancient bear, and then I think a couple of smaller ones that are surrounding it. He takes a step closer, and the smaller ones kind of like defensively, protect the ancient one and take this defensive stance around it. Ashton's trying to not be threatening, and he basically just is kind of talking to them and says that, Percy's an asshole, basically, and that they should drop a deuce somewhere in the castle in his honor. He then turns around, catches back up with Pike and the crew. Everyone makes their way to her house then, and she tells them to get comfortable while she's going to go upstairs and basically do some research. She eventually comes down a little while later and declares that she did find a ritual that she can do that will send the spirits of Bell's Hells to this place wherever Delilah is keeping Laudna's soul. And she explains that when you are resurrecting someone, you are retrieving their soul and placing it back in the body. And normally the soul is dwelling within one of these afterlife planes, and which one kind of depends on the person's beliefs and, several other factors. But where Laudna's soul is not that. It's not normal. It's some other place, some old separate plane that Delilah is apparently keeping her in. So this spell can send Bell's Hells there, with their mission being that they need to separate Delilah and Laudna so that then Pike can perform and complete this ritual. She does let them know that since they're basically being astrally projected, if they die over there, they don't die in real life. They will just return to the waking conscious world. However, there is like a spirit tether that will be connecting their astral projections to the real world. And if that is severed, they do die in real life. So she's basically just kind of like explaining the ground rules of how this is going to work. The group's like, okay, and they're readying for this journey. Amidst which Vex does present Orem with a sword. I think it's a magical +1 sword in effect to help. FCG is like, oh, if you're sending people's souls to the spirit realm, I guess I can't go because I don't have a soul. And, this whole argument comes up again. And Pike's like, well, I can just test if you guys want. Like, I have a ritual where we can see once and for all if you have a soul. And they're like, yeah, okay. So Pike does it, casts the spell, and FCG sees Pike in like this ethereal, like energetic form with these wings and like blazing eyes. And then FCG looks down at himself and kind of sees a similar like energy, not his normal, robot body. He's seeing his soul, in effect, his spirit.
Yeah.
And she's like, you already have eyes on you as well. And she points to FCG's chest, and there is the token of the change bringer.
Right.
So they're like, yeah, you have a soul. And FCG is kind of like coming to grips with this and is like, I must find a purpose now. I must, protect you guys. And they're like, well, what's different? That's just what you've been doing. And he's like, no, now it matters. And they're like, no, it's always mattered. So it's a nice little moment. Then they fully prepare the ritual, but they do need a bunch of material components, about almost 7,000 gold worth. But Vex is like, I got it. She comes back, gets those. They set everything up, and Pike casts the ritual.
Right.
So everyone's bodies, they're laying down on the ground, but next thing they know, they're being astrally projected to this new realm. It's dark. There's like jagged rocks landscaped, and there's like this fog of war, I think about 60 feet out, that Matt describes as like whenever you take a step, that fog extends a step. So like there's a constant shroud of war around them, basically, wherever they move. So they begin to explore this plane of existence, and eventually they come up and see this shack in the distance with a light glinting in it. They go to inspect it. I think Chetney kind of goes alone, scout style, and takes a peek in this cabin and sees that there is like this cackling black energy sitting alone on a chair in the cabin. And it doesn't really have a form, but Chetney notices that it is basically in the shape of Laudna as it like shifts and moves. And there is this other energy like inset her chest. And she looks sad, and she seems to be maybe crafting pate de Rolo. And there are these whispers that are coming in that are like, burn the witch, we found her, like, get her. And these whispers just keep getting louder and louder. And all of a sudden, the black form of Laudna disappears. And suddenly the fireplace that was in this cabin, like, it's very large and starts burning the cabin down. At the same moment, these like shadow mists start coming out from like the woods around this cabin and attack the rest of the party, and initiative is rolled. For the sake of brevity, we have this combat encounter with these like literal shadows as Chetney grabs the pate body and the bird skull from the cabin and ducks out of there as it's burning down to join everyone else. These shadows can like heal, they can create darkness, they can like become incorporeal and like disappear into the ground and come back up and attack. It's a very interesting combat, a little tricky, but Bell's Hells eventually do get the job done. There's a pretty cool how you do want to do this moment with Ashton and his like, weird timey-wimey gravity strikes. So they take care of all of the shadows, no one goes down. But in the meantime, this fire from the cabin has kind of gotten crazy and is beginning to burn everything. But Fern casts Tidal Wave, which I believe for the first time, and just extinguishes all the flames at once. So with the combat over, the party go back inside the cabin, now to find it empty. But Orem does find a board in the ground that leads to a tunnel. And they're like, well, I guess this is what we should check out. But Chetney's like, I'm a little rough, though. And so the party decides, like, well, can we rest here? I don't know if that's a good idea. They decide against it. FCG drops a mass healing word to bring Chetney up a little bit. But onward they go. So they trounce down this tunnel. It goes down, 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 deeper, deeper, deeper. And then it starts to climb back up. Chetney, again, is in the front, scouting. And he makes his way to the mouth of the tunnel. And as he's coming out, like it's almost like a Stranger Things upside down kind of transition, is at least how I felt like Matt was describing it.
Yeah, that's good.
He like comes up and it's like gravity is almost shifting as he like gets this new perspective, and he sees like all these trees and this crumbled wall and this city beyond it, and then a massive like dead tree beyond that. And there's this like eerily green mist kind of floating through this city, and that's where the session ends.
Cool. So yeah, that is episode 36, A Desperate Call. And if you've checked out this recap, you want to hear our whole episode discussion and dialogue about what we thought about it. In fact, if you want to give some of your thoughts on the episode, you can check the link below to go to the full episode discussion. All right, Will, my friend, what'd you think?
We back, baby. We back in Whitestone, man.